You have not come to something that can be touched, a blazing fire and darkness and gloom and a tempest and the sound of a trumpet and a voice whose words made the hearers beg that not another word be spoken to them, for they could not endure the order that was given. If even an animal touches the mountain, it shall be stoned to death. Indeed, so terrifying was the sight that Moses said, I tremble with fear. But you have come to Mount Zion, and to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, and to innumerable angels in festal gathering, and to the assembly of the firstborn who are enrolled in heaven, and to God, the judge of all, and to the spirits of the righteous made perfect, and to Jesus, the mediator of a new covenant, and to the sprinkled blood that speaks a better word than the blood of Abel. See that you do not refuse the one who is speaking. For if they did not escape when they refused the one who warned them on earth, how much less will we escape if we reject the one who warns from heaven? At that time his voice shook the earth. But now he has promised, yet once more I will shake not only the earth, but also the heaven. This phrase, yet once more, indicates the removal of what is shaken, that is, created things, so that what cannot be shaken may remain. Therefore, since we are receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken, let us give thanks, by which we offer to God an acceptable worship with reverence and awe. For indeed, our God is a consuming fire. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
The Ocean Ranger was a technological marvel. It was a mobile offshore drilling unit designed for harsh conditions in deep and turbulent seas. The rig was made to withstand winds of more than 100 knots. Before settling into its place in 1980 on the Grand Banks of Newfoundland, it had done time offshore also in Alaska and off of New Jersey and Ireland. The Ocean Ranger was massive. Get this, 396 feet long, 262 feet wide, 337 feet high. It had 12 anchors that weighed 45,000 pounds each. It weighed 25,000 tons and floated on two 400 feet long pontoons that rested 79 feet below the surface. In other words, the Ocean Ranger was built to last. On February 15, 1982, the Ocean Ranger disappeared into the icy waters of the North Atlantic, taking with it the lives of all 84 crew. A storm had come up quickly in the region and somehow had broken a port light, which is similar to a porthole in a ship. Then, into that vulnerable place in the structure, a 65-foot rogue wave came about and swamped the pontoons, and the water just rushed in. The crew tried to evacuate, but even those who made it off the platform before it sank perished of hypothermia or drowning. Everything in this world and in this life will undergo a shaking sooner or later. And no foundation, no matter how well designed, will survive if it is sunk only into the bedrock of this earthly existence. Our text today from Hebrews 12 has the preacher who wrote this sermon-like letter urging Christians to establish their faith foundation in heaven, not on earth. Only a faith founded in heaven is grounded enough to withstand the shaking that will come to us all. The past 2 weeks in the sermon series, Facets of Faith, we have heard first the call to a faith that is able to lean into the future, to have a sense of forwardness about it, to let go of that world that is slipping away. And then we heard a list of heroes and heroines of faith in Hebrew history who in the face of persecution and even death remained faithful. And we are called to emulate their witness and show ourselves to be faithful in our time. Now the writer of Hebrews tells us to set a faith foundation on eternal ground. Because all other ground is sinking sand, don't you know, as the hymn says. All other ground except Christ Jesus, who sits at the right hand of God on high, even now. I was in a meeting this week with some religious leaders in Dallas who were trying to figure out how to better support immigrants in a time when it has never felt more traumatic for them. A man from India was speaking. He had himself, some years ago, experienced being detained and deported, and now he is here as a U.S. citizen, and he is calling upon religious communities to be places of refuge and advocates for people like him. He said this: being an immigrant is feeling all the time like you are walking in quicksand. You know you can sink under the earth at any moment and just disappear. The Christians to whom Hebrews was written must have felt a lot like that. They felt themselves to be sojourners in a world that would never be their home. It was also the way Jews felt after AD 70, when Jerusalem was destroyed by the Romans, and as well as their grand temple. And Jews and Christians both were forced to wander about, trying to find a safe place to be, avoiding Roman authorities, never feeling at home in the world, always looking over their shoulder. And to this, the writer of Hebrews essentially says, what do you expect? There is no homeland in this life worth founding your faith upon. Even Mount Zion. Every nation, every empire, every land will be shaken. So you better found your faith on something eternal, not temporal. And you, some of you, know this very personally in all sorts of ways. You may not have meant to, but you trusted your good health. And then an accident or a diagnosis made it feel as if the ground under your feet was shaking. Or you didn't mean to, but you built your life on the foundation of a relationship that you thought was solid. And it was your identity. It was the place you felt at home in the world. And then a spouse or a partner said goodbye and walked out the door, and you felt as if the ground had been taken right out from under your feet. Or you thought that job you had for 30 years was secure. Of course, I use that number 30 just as an arbitrary number. Today actually is the day, the 30th Sunday. 30 years ago this day, I preached for the first time as your pastor. Thank you for bearing with me all these many years. But for some of you, the pink slip came, and you weren't sure where to turn. You had imagined working for that company until retirement. And now you're out there beating the bushes, hoping someone sees you, hires you, gives you a chance to firm up the ground under your feet. The Atlantic magazine has started a new featured section to address the problem of what they have termed workism. The idea is that they say that in the whole history of the world, as people got wealthier, they worked less, not more. They actually were able to use the extra time for rest and for spiritual pursuits. But in the last 30 years or so, something has happened, and even people of means now, the rich, are turning to work for meaning and purpose in their lives. They are essentially allowing work to replace the role of religion in giving a sense of identity and significance to people. And many are now waking up to discover what a weak foundation that is for a meaningful life. And we're told they're turning to yoga and meditation to find their soul again and deliver it from addiction to technology and to the bankruptcy of workism. They should keep it up. They're on the right track. Maybe adding prayer and church to that, by the way, would be a good thing. Keep the spirituality coming. This week, we commemorated what the New York Times has called the 400th anniversary of the founding of our nation. I know you want to say it was 1776, but in a deeper way, it was August 20th of 1619. That was the day that the ship called the White Lion docked in what would become the colony of Jamestown in Virginia, carrying 20 slaves from Angola in Africa. The story of our nation is inextricably tied to the relationship between our ideals of liberty that pulsed in the hearts of pilgrims who landed at Plymouth Rock 13 months later, by the way, and the actual lived experience of a nation in how it has dealt with Native Americans, African slaves and their descendants, Chinese and Japanese immigrants, and nowadays people of Latinx descent. We've built on a shaky foundation. It's been the shame of white Christians from the beginning that we have defended a story of America that deliberately fails the test of the very heaven we preach. And it fails because we have not allowed our vision of heaven to dictate to us the vision of earth that we should create together. The African-American preacher and theologian Howard Thurman deeply influenced both Martin Luther King Sr. and Jr. In his important book, Jesus and the Disinherited, Thurman recounts a moment when he was challenged for his Christian faith. He was leading a delegation of students in 1935 on a friendship mission. They went to India and Burma and Ceylon, which is now Sri Lanka. And after giving a lecture at a law college in Ceylon, the principal of the school invited him for tea. They sat there until the man turned to him and said that he was interested to know why Thurman was there. Not why he was leading this group, but why he was there. You see, he recounted the history of slavery in the West and how it was Christians who treated these people like savages. He knew of segregation and of the lynchings and how those who terrorized people of African descent often did so in the name of the Christian God. And then said this to him, "I am a Hindu. I do not understand. Here you are in my country standing deep within the Christian faith and tradition. I do not wish to be rude to you, but sir, I think you are a traitor to all the darker people of the earth. I am wondering what you, an intelligent man, can say in defense of your position." Thurman went on to tell him about the difference between Christ and Christ's church. That the Jesus he followed was born to an oppressed people. He lived and died a scorned Jew. And Jesus stands forever as the defender of the disinherited of the earth. Any and every time Jesus is used to support the rights of the strong to oppress the weak, he is misused. Jesus' resurrection after his lynching has now established him as the heavenly man who judges every earthly kingdom. When we worship and obey him as Lord of all, we are not consoling our souls with the hope of heaven someday when we die. We are committing our bodies to the cause of heaven's justice here on earth now. The poet Seamus Heaney translated a passage of Sophocles' play Philoctetes this way. History says, don't hope on this side of the grave. But then, once in a lifetime, the longed-for tidal wave of justice can rise up, and hope and history rhyme. Yeah. That's what we're after. This is what happens when we know we belong to an unshakable kingdom. We are citizens of heaven on earth. And that means we have a kind of upside down view of things. If you have a chance, I hope someday you'll go to Barcelona to see the Sagrada Familia, one of the most imaginative cathedrals, not cathedral, but a church building ever built. It was started in the late 19th century, and Antoni Gaudi took over the project in 1883 and shifted the emphasis of how it would be carried out. In fact, in the year 2026, they hope to finally have it finished, which would be the 100th anniversary of Gaudi's untimely death. When Gaudi was a child, he was sickly and couldn't interact with kids at school very well, and his mother would take him on long walks in nature and ask him to look carefully at things and then say what he saw. And he observed in nature that there's really no straight lines, that there are no right angles, that this is a living world. And so he wanted to incorporate that into the church building. And he has done so in a remarkable way. Whereas most buildings, most churches, most massive church structures have been built so deeply into the earth and so heavy in ways to give you the illusion of eternal stability, Gaudi reverses things. He wants you to imagine that the foundation of this church is in heaven, not on earth. And in fact, if you go inside the church and look carefully at the columns that support it, when you look up, what you see is they look like upside-down trees with the roots of the columns spreading out into the ceiling of the church. And outside, on top of the cathedral, this church, you'll see many baskets with fruits and vegetables being symbolized in these baskets, as if to say that if you really want the hungers of this world satisfied, you need to look up, not down. You need to look up to the new creation and the abundance of life that is being promised there. You heard from Blake Perry this morning about his Eagle Scout project. By the way, you even clapped for him. They never clap. Congratulations. Twice they clapped for you. Just saying. Anyway, this project to bring all these supplies to the border is an example of this kind of Christian imagination at work. Why? Because it's rooted in a resistant sort of faith. A faith that refuses to judge the value of persons by where they come from on earth or what they look like, because everyone's identity is rightly rooted in heaven. See? My daughter Cameron just returned from the border this week. She was with our partners at Fellowship Southwest, and they got to see firsthand what is happening with families that have come across the border there and are being detained while their status is being sorted out. They got to visit with our partner churches, too, who are providing love and care for these poor and desperate people who have left everything behind in hopes of a safe and sustainable life. In Brownsville, they met Carlos Navarro, the pastor of Iglesia Bautista, West Brownsville, for 26 years. He has created a major immigration respite center in the church's building. Supply rooms are well stocked with everything labeled and ready to use. Volunteers are well trained, and they estimate that they have now served more than 3,200 immigrants. Hygiene is the number one issue, he said. Number two, we treat everyone with dignity and respect. We may not approve of the way they came here, but everyone has got to eat. And number three, we make sure everyone who comes here is presented with the gospel. When they get to heaven, there will be no borders, no papers, no skin color, he said. And then he added, this is the best thing that's ever happened to our church. Ha! There. In heaven, there will be no borders, no papers, no skin color. So when the church's foundation is in heaven, that's the way we live on earth. And then the church will never be shaken. And when you ground your life in what is eternal, no storms of life that ever come will sink you forever. Amen.